Good morning, everyone. Let's start our Wednesday class uh, with some mantras. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bho Bhuva Swaha, Tatsavitra Varenayam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Naha Prachodayat. Asto Ma Satgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, मृत्युर्मा अमृतं गम्य ओम सहनावतु सहना भुनक्तु सवीर्यं करवावहि तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहि ओम शांति 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 We often hear the terms Dvaita, Advaita, Vishishtadvaita. So I thought today I should elaborate on these terms so that you can understand exactly what do they mean, what are the similarities and what are the differences in this. And it starts out the word Vedanta. Vedanta, that means the end of the Vedas. That's Vedanta. And this Vedanta name is given to the teachings of the Upanishads because Upanishads are at the end of the Vedas and various other religious writings that interpret, expand, or elaborate upon the teachings of the Upanishads. So those are all called Vedanta. On our Thursday class, we do study Upanishad, and we all know that the way the Upanishads are written, the way they are organized and systematized, they are not very easy to comprehend. Okay? So very deep philosophical statements are made. So your mind has to be prepared to understand the Upanishadic teachings. They were first systematized. So even though they were there, but they got systematized by sage Badrayan about 500 to 200 BCE. That was the time of sage Badrayan. And they are also known as Brahma Sutras, or they are also called Vedanta Sutras. And Brahma Sutras, they contain about 500 sutra, 500 aphorism. Aphorism means that's an English term for sutra. And in these 500 sutras, there's a summary of basic philosophy of the Upanishads in 4 treatises, which is called Adhyasas. And the predominant view among the scholars is that the Brahma Sutras reflect the philosophical portions of the Chandogya Upanishad more than that of any other Upanishads. So if you are studying the Brahma Sutra or the Chandogya Upanishad, or if you want to really know this philosophy, it's a good idea to have a background. Only then you can understand the deeper implications of these writings. The aphorisms of the Brahma Sutra are very short. See, just like a Yoga Sutras. Sutra really means a short sentence. Sometimes it's not even a full sentence. So that's why, because sometimes it's only 1 or 2 words, the whole sutra. So these sutras cannot be comprehended without a commentary. So that means somebody has to elaborate on it, open it up for us, because it's just like a little bud. So the traditional commentaries written on the Brahma Sutras constitute the basis of various philosophical systems, some of which provide diametrically opposed interpretations of the same short sutra. So If you do the deep studies, you will see that somebody is saying this and somebody else is on the same words saying something else. So that's where these three major commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, they were provided by the medieval scholars, Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, and the Madhvacharya. These are the three medieval scholars, three acharyas. And they do differ in their interpretations. And from their interpretations came these popular systems of Vedantic philosophy. So Advaith Vedantic or non-dualism, that is Shankaracharya's philosophy. Adi Sankracharya's philosophy, Advaith, non-dualism. Then there is a qualified non-dualism, qualified, Vishishtadvaita. That is by Ramanujacharya. And then the Dvaita, which is a dualism of Madhvacharya. So as students of this Vedic knowledge, we should know these. Okay? So Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, and Madhvacharya. So these systems, they differ more in detail than in substance. The basic difference in these systems is in their beliefs pertaining to the interrelationships between Brahma, the world, and the Atma. Okay? So interrelationship between these three. There are definitely several other Vedantic systems. I'm sure you are familiar with the term Bhaskar, Nimbarak, Shirikant, Shiripati, Baldev, Vallabha, Shukra, all these different philosophies also. So all these systems maintain that Brahma is the highest reality. So all of them. So even these three main one also, and the others also, they all say Brahma is the highest reality. But the interrelationship between these three, they all talk a little differently about it. Let's look at the Advaita philosophy today first, which is called Advaita Vedanta. So Advaita school of Vedanta is based upon the interpretations of Vedanta provided by Adi Sankracharya. So we should know that. He was a medieval sage and scholar. Often people call him a genius of a Hindu metaphysical tradition. Shankaracharya ji, he lived between 788 and 820 AD. That was the time. He was born into a Brahman family in the city of Cochin in South India. He received his education in Benares and became an ascetic when he was a boy. And by the age of 8, he was well versed with the 4 Vedas. And by the age of 12, he had mastered all Hindu scriptures. He became a religious and spiritual teacher as well as a reformer, establishing 4 monasteries in India. One at the Badrinath in Himalayas. We are familiar with that name. A second at Dwarka on the west coast. Third at Puri on the east coast. And the fourth at Shiringari in the state of Mysore. So these are called mutts, char mutt. These monasteries, even today, they are very popular centers of learning and pilgrimage in India. And that's what people say, Char Dham also. Shankaracharya ji traveled throughout India, filled his short life of 32 years. He lived only for 32 years on this path, with unprecedented religious and spiritual activity. I mean, you can imagine back then, what was the condition of the roads of the towns? He walked barefoot everywhere. His chief works are his commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, as I said earlier. 10 principal Upanishads also, there are commentaries on those, and Bhagavad Gita. So in that short span of life, he wrote various other books also on Advaita philosophy. One of his books we are studying in our Saturday class, Vivek Chudamani, crest jewel of discrimination. And you all know how much we are enjoying that. Then there is a Upadesh Sahasari, 1,000 teachings. Then there's a Atam Bodh, Bhaj Govindam, and most popular devotional poem he wrote, Saundarya Lahiri. So there are several books he has written in that short span of life. Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta is a philosophy of oneness of all creation. Oneness. Matter as well as consciousness. Advaita really means monism or non-dualism. So Advaita Vedanta is very popular system of philosophy and has many followers among the Hindus. And this school of philosophy is especially popular among scientific and intellectual communities of Hindu and non-Hindus alike. Advaita Vedanta provides a complete unified theory of everything in the universe, a goal that modern physics is striving to achieve. According to Advaita Vedanta, everything inanimate and animate. That means living or non-living is nothing but Brahma. Nothing but Brahma. Brahma is the absolute reality, and there is no other reality but Brahma. In the words of Shankaracharya ji, part of that we study in the Vivek Chudamani also. It says, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Jivo Brahma Eva Na Paraha. It's a very popular saying of Shankaracharya ji. That means Brahma alone is the truth. Brahma Satyam. The world is unreal. Jagat Mithya. So Atma is Brahma only and none other. Jivo Brahma Eva Na Paraha. When Shankaracharya ji says that the world is unreal, it should not be construed to mean that the world is totally unreal. To understand his statements, one must always see them in the frame of reference in which they are made. That is very, very important. Some words we cannot take it literally. We got to understand in which reference those words are being spoken. All his assertions are explicit or implicit comparisons with absolute reality, which is Brahma. And that was the only thing which interested him, Brahma. So that from that standpoint, he said, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya. Just keeps on changing. It cannot be real in the absolute sense. But to the common person, world is real. Why? Because we are in the grip of Maya. And we perceive the world through the mind and the senses alone. We say that my eyes are seeing it. How can it not be true? Because we are understanding it through these limited apparatus. When the mind and senses are transcended through spiritual experience, the world of things and beings disappear altogether. And what remains is Brahma. As somebody who's in Samadhi, as somebody who has risen above this temporariness, they'll say that Brahma is the only reality, nothing else. In the realm of matter, Einstein's equation we are all familiar with, E equal to mc square. We all learned that in our middle schools or high schools, depending upon what we studied. That confirms that the cosmic matter is actually cosmic energy. Since modern science has not yet accounted for human consciousness in its scientific investigations, it cannot yet prove that the cosmic energy has actually arisen from the cosmic consciousness. So modern science cannot currently explain the unity of all things and beings in the world as Shankaracharya did. That doesn't mean that in one day modern science will not reach there, but currently it has not. So for this reason, it is said that Shankaracharya had already started where Einstein ended several centuries later. Now let's look at the second philosophy, Vishishtadvaita. Ramanujacharya, 1055 to 1137 AD, was the chief exponent of this school of Vedanta philosophy. He was born into a Brahmin family in Bhutapuri in South India. He was a saint and a scholar. See, you see that all these saints and the scholars, those kind of, that was encouraged. So saint does not mean that you just leave the world. You live in the world and you still keep on coming up with the ideas, the philosophies, so that it can help the masses. So he was a saint and a scholar and taught Vedanta at the sacred shrine of Shri Rangam. Where is that? It is near modern day Tiruchirappalli in the south. So deeply influenced by the devotional poetry of the South Indian mystics, which are known as Alvars, Ramanuja believed that devotion or the bhakti was the central teachings of Vedanta. That's what he drew from that, the bhakti. He neither favored strict monism taught by Shankaracharya, who was 2 centuries earlier, nor the pure dualism taught by Madhvacharya approximately 2 centuries later. So he was like in between those two. So unlike Shankaracharya ji, Ramanujacharya favored devotion over knowledge as a means of self-realization. He proclaimed self-surrender as an expeditious path for salvation. Surrender. He attempted to synthesize theism with monism and formulated a school of religious thought known as Vishishtadvaita. So that means Vishisht means qualified. Qualified monism or qualified non-dualism. So both Vishishtadvaita and Advaita, they both hold that Brahma is the only independent and absolute reality. And this reality is pervading in the entire universe. Both say that. But in Advaita Vedanta, Brahma is attributeless. So there's no attributes to it. But in Vishisht Advaita, the individual states and the material objects are internal distinctions of Brahma. So there's a distinction. That's what he said. There are many followers of this school of Vedanta among Hindus. Among the chief works of Ramanujacharya is Vedarth Sangraha. That is a scripture composed by him. It's like a sense of the Vedas according to him. What are the Vedas talking about? And he wrote Vedanta Sar also, the essence of Vedanta. And his commentary, of course, on the Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra. So if you're a serious student, maybe you should pick up a commentary by Adi Sankracharya ji and then look at the commentary by Ramanujacharya also. And look at it where they differ, because you already know Bhagavad Gita, and see what their take is on the Bhagavad Gita, the words of Lord Krishna. So the two most suitable works of Vishisht Advaita for beginners are Yatindra Mat Deepika by Shri Nivas Das and Vedanta Karikavali by Buchi Venkantacharya. So there's a lot of other acharyas also who have written other books if you really want to go deeper into these philosophies. So today I'm just only giving you some information so that you understand that there is a lot more in the library of our Hinduism. Then comes the Dvaita philosophy. The school of philosophy was developed by Madhvacharya. See, at least we should know the names. And he was born in 1199 and died 1278 AD. Born in Udupi, near Mangalore, on the west coast of India. Madhvacharya. He was a Vaishnava, worshipper of Lord Vishnu. He was a saint and a religious reformer. He developed a system of philosophy that combines dualism with theism and is known as Dvaita, the philosophy of the two. Dvaita. According to Dvaita Vedanta, there are two categories of the ultimate reality. Brahma is God, is the absolute reality, and is called by various names, such as Narayan, Vishnu, Hari, and many others, many names, many forms. So individual selves, which we call jivs, and the material objects, which we call prakriti, are relative realities. That is eternally existing, distinct from each other. So jiv and prakriti, but dependent on God. That's what the Dvaita philosophy says. There are many followers of this school of religious tradition among Hindus. The chief works of Madhvacharya include his commentaries on Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, and other religious and metaphysical treatises. The most systematic introduction to the philosophy of Dvaita Vedanta is found in Vadvali. So that is like a philosophical manual written by Jay Tirath. He was a 14th century Vedantic scholar. So you can see that there is so much information, deep information available. We have to have the quest to learn. Only then we can spend time, enough time to understand it. Let's look at some of the similarities and the differences between these three. Number one, Advaith philosophy declares that Brahma is the only absolute reality. Advaith. Brahma is free from internal and external distinctions. So it's just like a homogeneous oneness everywhere. There are no parts to it. Individual selves and material objects are not real, according to this philosophy, but are illusory appearances. And they illusory differences, they were made possible by the operation of the magical power, which we call Maya. So Maya Shakti is the one which is making it look like this. But actually, it's just one homogeneous. And Maya is not separate from Brahma, according to this. Maya is indistinguishable from him. See, just like the burning power of a fire is inseparable from the fire itself. So the same way Maya Shakti is, it belongs to Brahma. But because of the Maya, we see the differences. So like Advaita, Vishishtadvaita also declares that Brahma is the only absolute and independent reality, and accepts the Advaita view that Brahma is free from external distinctions. However, Vishishtadvaita declares that Brahma possesses internal distinctions. Internal. Since the conscious selves and the unconscious matter are his internal parts. So according to Vishishtadvaita, Brahma is the unity qualified by many internal parts or attributes. So Vishishtadvaita says there are attributes internally in Brahma. But Advaita says there is no attributes at all, it's attributeless. And what does Dvaita philosophy says? Dvaita declares that there are two categories of the ultimate reality. Brahma as a personal God is the absolute reality. And the individual jiva, which we call souls, and the material objects are the relative reality, distinct from each other and dependent upon God. Okay. Let's look at another similarity and distinction also. According to Advaita philosophy, the world is not a creation. It never got created. It is just an illusory appearance of the Brahma. The world appearance is taken for real by those who have not realized Brahma, according to them. The wise are not deluded by the illusory power of Maya. Why? Because they can see right through it and find nothing else but Brahma. So they say there's nothing but Brahma everywhere. So both the Vishishtadvaita and the Dvaita scholars believe that creation is a real act of Brahma. And he creates the world out of unconscious matter, which is called Prakriti, in accordance with the past deeds, karmas of the selves. Okay? So creation did happen at a certain time. So this is one of the big difference between these philosophies. Number 3. All three schools agree that individual souls are not created by Brahma or God. So it was never created. Advaita philosophy declares that in its liberated state, Atma is identical with the Brahman. Vishishtadvaita and Dvaita declares that in its liberated state, even then Atma is not identical. That means there are several layers to this liberation also. So it stays separated for some time, for a long time. And that's how it's distinct from Brahma or God. So in that state, however, Atma is untainted by imperfection, is free from ignorance, avidya, and bondage. And as such enjoys the eternal bliss of complete union with the Brahma when it's fully liberated. Number 4, all three schools agree that ignorance, which we call avidya in Sanskrit, causes the Atma to forget its divine nature. So Atma is divine, it is part of Brahma, but we forget it. Why? Because of the ignorance, avidya. And to mistakenly identify itself with the body, mind, and whatever else we have. So we forget our real nature and we just identify ourselves with the non-self. They even call it anatma. So Atma and anatma. The false identification of the Atma with the body, mind, and intellect is the cause of its bondage to material existence. And not only the bondage, but then there's a consequent sufferings also because of that bondage. Number 5, in order to liberate the Atma from bondage, all three schools recommend the study of the scriptures. So knowledge is recommended. Performing work without the desire for reward, Karma Yoga, is recommended by all of them. And complete self-surrender to Brahma with intense devotion is also recommended. So study of the scriptures, work without the desire for reward, and complete self-surrender with intense devotion, intense love. Then meditation. All three philosophies, they talk about meditation and prayer. True knowledge of the self and the Brahma is an essential prerequisite for attaining moksha, liberation. So goal, according to all three philosophies, is moksha, liberation. But the devotion and the prayers, this is more talked about in the Vishishtadvaita and the Dvaita. So they favor devotion and self-surrender over knowledge. So in the Advaita, knowledge is predominant. The other two, devotion is more prominent. Or even as a means for self-realization also. And the next one is all three schools have produced unbroken tradition of Acharya. So that's why even their names, Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, Madhvacharya, Acharya, or saints and scholars from the past down to our time. We see the Acharyas even now. and even thousands of years ago too. So that means a teacher is needed to show the path. So their institutions are still the major centers of spirituality and even mysticism in India. So this is just a little background and little explanation of these three main Vedantic systems. And the reason I wanted to give you this information today, because we use these terms from time to time. And we should know that at least have some idea what do they really mean when we talk about Advaith or Advaith. Vishishtadvaita, we don't use that word that much, but that's like an in between. But Dvaith and Advaith, we use the term quite a bit. So let's end the class here today. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnamev Avashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.